I'd like to maybe talk about your careers, but also focus on the Koshien documentary, which is the subject of our program tonight. But hopefully, if time allows, we can also touch on some other projects, because you've both worked on really, really interesting things that I would love to touch on. And I want to encourage our viewers to, you know how to use chat. So go ahead and put comments or questions in the chat. I know that some people in our audience grew up in Japan and have experiences growing up with Koshien in their lives. And so I would love to hear your experiences growing up with just this phenomenon, which I don't think we have anything quite equivalent here in the United States. So I would love to hear any of your experiences growing up with Koshien. So first, let me read a couple of bios that I put together from researching the internet. So I apologize for any mistakes. Please correct any mistakes I make, and also for any pronunciation mistakes that I make, please. So first, I would like to introduce you to Ema Ryan Yamazaki. She was born in Kobe and raised in Osaka, and moved to New York when she was 19 and attended NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. After graduating from NYU, she began her career as an assistant editor, mentored by documentary mogul Sam Pollard. She has edited work shown on HBO, PBS, and CNN, among others, and has directed TV documentaries for NHK and Al Jazeera English. Her featured directorial debut, Monkey Business: The Adventures of Curious George's Creators, was crowdsourced and premiered at the LA Film Festival and won the Audience Award at the Nantucket Film Festival. In 2019, she directed Koshien, Japan's Field of Dreams, which is a special co-production with NHK on the occasion of the 100th National High School Baseball Championship. It premiered at Doc NYC, aired on ESPN and the Criterion Channel, and was released theatrically in Japan to great acclaim. In 2020, Ema received the Documentary Filmmaker of the Year award from Yahoo Japan. I'm going to stop there. There's more I could say, but I'm going to stop there because hopefully in our discussions we can talk about more recent work that Ema's been working on. Our second guest is Eric Nyardi. Nyardi? Did I say that right?
Yeah, Nyari is the...
Nyari, thank you. Is president of, am I saying this right? Ceneric Creative and International, and he's international representative for renowned restoration house Ceneric Inc. He's the son of Balaj Nyari, former president of Ceneric. I just forgot how to say it. Ceneric. I couldn't find out anything about where you grew up, but I know that you came to Japan at 21, when you were 21. Your feature film productions include Amir Naderi's Cut and Monte, or Mountain, and Yoshifumi Tsubota's The Shell Collector. In documentary, Eric produced the critically acclaimed portrait Ryuichi Sakamoto Coda and the companion concert film Ryuichi Sakamoto Live at the Park. He also produced films by Ema Ryan Yamazaki, who is his not only his business partner, but his life partner, including Koshien. Recent credits include Takeshi Fukunaga's Einir Mosir, which was awarded a special jury mention in Tribeca's International Narrative Competition in 2020, and is currently screening on Netflix. Was also executive producer on a film I saw recently on Criterion Channel that was just beautiful, Christopher Makoto Yogi's I Was a Simple Man, which premiered at Sundance. And I recommend it to everybody. It's on Criterion. Eric has managed 4K restorations of Kenzi Mizoguchi's Ugetsu, Sancho the Bailiff, and A Story from Chikamatsu from Martin Scorsese's The Film Foundation, Yasujiro Ozu's Late Spring, and very exciting, recently, The Rickshaw Man, directed by Hiroshi Inagaki, which premiered at the Venice Classics section at the 2020 Venice Film Festival, along with Emma's documentary about the restoration of the history of this film called Wheels of Fate. I really hope we get to talk about that. That sounds like such a great project. So sorry for the long introduction, but welcome, Emma and Eric. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you so much for having us. We're very excited to be here.
So I should start by saying, how are you? How's everything in Tokyo?
Everything is good. We just moved into this house this past week. So we're just moved, and I'm also 8 months pregnant. So a lot going on, but otherwise, I mean, it's all good things. And so we're kind of preparing for the next chapter of our lives. But it's a sunny morning in Tokyo, and we're happy. We're doing well. Thank you.
Congratulations. That's so exciting. Does that mean you're sort of permanently located in Tokyo?
Up until the pandemic, we were going back and forth between New York and Tokyo quite often, maybe 10 trips a year. But since the pandemic, we've really been in Tokyo, and we'll see what happens once it's kind of easier to travel. I do want to keep, exploring outside of Japan as well, but we've definitely made a base here in Tokyo in the past few years.
Mm-hmm. So there's so much to talk about. It's sort of hard to know where to start. We can go back and forth talking about your career, but maybe we will focus on baseball and on Koshien and this documentary. I will mention that today is kind of an auspicious day. Today in the US, it is Jackie Robinson Day, where we celebrate the first Black major league player. And it was 75 years ago today that Jackie stepped on Ebbets Field and played his first game as a Brooklyn Dodger. And that's why I'm wearing my Brooklyn Dodger cap. So hopefully a lot of our audience members are baseball fans, but for people in our audience who don't know that much about baseball and maybe don't know about high school baseball in Japan, can you just give us a rough overview of what Koshien is?
Sure. So Koshien is both the name of a stadium as well as the name of a tournament, the high school baseball tournament. And so Koshien is also a place where every high school kid dreams of playing there one day, but only about 50 teams each summer can play in the championship. It's a knockout tournament out of 4,000 schools across the country. So and I would compare it maybe to March Madness and the Super Bowl combined for a Japanese audience. It's really more popular than professional baseball or other professional sports. Every game is nationally broadcast on NHK, so it's just unavoidable if you're here in August. And it's very intense, as you might have seen in our film. It's a year-round sport, so kids practice 360 days a year, often 4 to 8, 9 hours a day, and it comes from the discipline of martial art. Baseball in Japan, when baseball was imported into Japan in the late 19th century, there was no such thing as sport in Japan. So it just had to become a martial art. And that's why it was incorporated into education. Students started to play it before adults. And that's why the intensity, the discipline, it's a tool for education. And that's very much still the way it is, which is why you might have seen our film and thought it's a totally different sport from your casual baseball that you might see in downtown somewhere you live. So that's what Koshien is.
So I have the trailer set up here. So if anybody hasn't seen the film yet, I could show the trailer in a little bit. But first, I just want to also chat with you about how you got started with this project, how you got involved. Are you a baseball fan? Did you grow up with Koshien?
Yes. So I actually grew up, 15 minutes from the Koshien Stadium. So not that so proximity to this Mecca, this kind of field of dreams was something I grew up with, and I also watched high school baseball growing up. But actually my connection to baseball is through this player called Ichiro Suzuki, who, I'm sure a lot of you know was the kind of the first majorly successful Japanese at least batter in the major leagues. He played for the Seattle Mariners for a long time. And so he was my hero growing up. I really feel like I am who I am thanks to him. And I just saw in my childhood and teenage years him succeed in the US, and it was a big inspiration for me to also follow my dreams later on. So I always knew that baseball was more than a sport. Like, I didn't look at Ichiro and say I want to play baseball as well. I just looked at him and thought, okay, I want to live the way he conducts himself, to work hard and to have this combination of individual and team skills. So baseball was always a big part of my life. And so when I decided to come back to Japan for the first time in almost a decade to explore something to tell a story about, I was interested to find an arena where I could capture something that would speak to Japan's past, present, and future. That's easier said than done. You can't just film the streets and examine society. So when we found out it was the 100th Koshien that upcoming summer, it just seemed like the perfect microcosm of exploring what was going on in Japan at the time. This was in 2018, which seems like a long time ago now because of the pandemic. But so this is why we, through my background in that, and also looking for something that could represent Japanese society at its most intense side, I would say, but still kind of an intense arena to explore that with. Koshien and high school baseball seems to be a perfect match.
So did you pitch it to NHK? Is that how you got started?
Yeah, I guess we pitched it to NHK. We also had to get permission from the high school baseball union, which was the harder part of the process, I would say. They've never allowed a scale of something like this before. There's often domestic programming that's like short term, you go film at a school for a few days, but we were asking for a lot of access and also trying to get it to an international audience. And so that process was quite difficult. We got it done clearly. And so that's where we're combining with NHK and the high school baseball union was where we started. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Eric, I'm not sure. I don't think you're listed as a producer. Did you have anything to do with putting this together?
Yeah, I was the producer.
Oh, you were? Okay, sorry.
Yes. And it was our first project actually really together. We had worked on a couple of projects before, but we shot the film in 2018. We had a major shoot in the spring and the summer, and we got married in between. So Koshien was kind of like our honeymoon in the summer of 2018. And our first project, like really in tandem. I had worked a bit on Ema's first project, but this was the first one that we really planned together from the beginning and executed. So it holds a special place in our lives, I would say, also for that reason.
Mm-hmm. So you knew if you could work on this together that you could be married, right?
Exactly. we took the leap of faith before, but fortunately, it's been a fruitful partnership thus far. So.
Okay, well, maybe I will tee up the trailer just to show to people. And we're already getting some questions in the chat, which is great. First, I just want to mention that Soji Kashiwagi says hello. He's in our audience tonight with his mother, Sadako. And we have some other questions, but I will get to those. But let me just do a share screen, and then I will show the trailer. Sorry.
甲子園って聖地だと思います。高校生が野球やってたらもう全員がそこに行きたい。もう本当にメジャーリーグで言ったらワールドシリーズみたいな場所なので。
中で忘れられてるような純真さを皆さんが求めてるんじゃないかな。
目的っていうのは野球と一緒に人間性を高めていく。
おはようございます。ありがとうございます。
おはようございます。ありがとうございます。
うちの子たちね、一生かけてフォローはできるけれども、3年間しか入ってきた子たちにはやってあげられない。本当に見たことがないの、子供の試合を。
1番重成和夫。
チームが勝つために自分は何しなきゃいけないかということをしっかり考えてやってください。いいですか？はい。日本というのはこう切腹をしてお家を守るとか、そういったことも昔は行われてきたチームだとか組織だとか仲間だとか大事にするお国柄だと思います。今までのやり方は絶対変わりませんし、
働き方を見直す動きは今日本社会の課題となっています。
ある程度したら針金外してあげなきゃいけないんだなって知ったのはここ最近。高校野球に古くていいものたくさんある。だけども新しくて変えていかなきゃいけないものは変えていかなきゃいけない。スコアボードは僕の土表ですから、それがどういうふうになるか。
So I hope everybody got a nice flavor of the documentary by watching the trailer, and we still have permission to watch the movie through this weekend. So anyone who hasn't seen the film yet, if you don't have the link, just email me or Jill, we can send it to you. But hopefully most of you did get a chance to watch it already, and I want to get your reactions to the documentary itself too. Please put your comments in the chat. I want to know what people thought of the coach, Mizutani. I'm very curious how he comes across to a Western audience. He seems very Japanese to me, but I just wonder if people found him too strict or too, I don't know. He uses the word seppuku. I mean, so I think that gives you an idea of where his head is at in terms of coaching baseball. But you know, the first question I want to ask you both is this. So you filmed in 2018. It came out in 2019. Do you remember this? Do you remember the process and everything, or is it kind of fading from memory?
No, it's unforgettable. I feel like definitely memorable. Yeah.
And let's see, we have some questions like from Donna says, how did you decide on featuring those two teams in your documentary?
Yeah, great question. So first, we actually filmed 4 teams because, you know, when it's a knockout tournament, 1 loss and you're out of the running, we couldn't risk filming a team and then them not making it, and then the film is called Koshien and you never even get to see the tournament. So this was a massive, you know, challenge on our part. And so to make, you know, even 4 teams, you never know, but to cover our bases, we filmed with 4 teams, but ultimately only needed 2 teams to tell the story. In searching for the teams, one thing we had in mind was we wanted to make sure, you know, the international audience, especially in the US, would be engaged. So we thought it would be smart to link it to Major League Baseball players that, you know, the American fans knew of. So thus, you know, Shohei Ohtani was a big candidate, also some other players. So linking it through that was a big thing. And also, although we didn't end up using that much of it in the final film, Yokohama as a place was very interesting to us because it was the place where baseball originally was imported into. And also it's still a very, very robust place for baseball because of its history. So we thought we could dive in more into the history of baseball in Japan through that angle. So between those different criteria, we ended up getting introduced to Coach Mizutani, who, you know, was the underdog, but so charismatic and very much represented this 20th century thought of, you know, I think a typical man of his age, I think, in Japan. And also when we learned that he coached, you know, the coach that coached Otani, and we started to see these connections, that he had a son going to that, you know, the Otani school. It just seemed to all come together. So we wanted to, so it made sense to pair these two schools. I think if Mizutani had made it to Koshien that year, it might have been a film just about his team. But actually, I think it's a better film. Although on the day they lost, I didn't feel that way. But you know, to be able to have many layers thanks to having two teams and the differences and kind of the progression of generations displayed.
Yeah, that was that hard to film him after he lost the game?
Very, very hard. The day of the game, you know, none of us expected them to lose in that way. We maybe were dreaming that they would make it all the way, but it was a shock because it hadn't happened in almost 2 decades. And I remember I was a mess too. I was believed in the team so much that I had to really, you know, keep it together. And I kept telling the camera person, like, don't stop crying, like keep filming, you know, you need to capture this. But then in the following day, you know, who wants to be filmed at a time when you're feeling so low? And that's part of the challenges of filmmaking sometimes, and you have to kind of explain and negotiate, you know, we've been filming you, work toward this so hard for every day, you know, we really need to now see the toll it's taking on you. And it took a few tries, and ultimately his wife invited us to have dinner at their house, and I just took the camera person with me and we just filmed for a few minutes. It was otherwise a kind of a consolation evening, so that's how we got that done.
Is that the shot where he's just kind of sitting by himself on the couch?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh yeah, that is tough.
Yeah.
So you did capture a lot of emotion in this documentary. So I think that's what makes it so compelling. You must have a lot of extra footage. Is there like a Koshien 2 you could make?
We filmed over 300 hours, and the film is 94 minutes. So, you know, we definitely, in every documentary film, you have to, they say, kill your darlings. And this was one of those cases. You know, I wish there was a way we know, still we filmed also many kids. We only feature a couple of kids, but there were so many wonderful kids and their stories. And no, we don't have a plan to release it in any time, but we have it. So maybe for the right occasion, for the 150th tournament, something like that.
I don't think we could make a second film from the material, but we could definitely make a series version. Maybe break it into 6 30-minute episodes, but we'd have to go back in the footage and really re-edit, but it's possible.
Yeah, I think we need to talk to ESPN about this. So let's see. I want to go back. There is a question from Ellen. She asks, why is there no equivalent at the college level to the intensity of what happens at high school?
Yeah, I mean, there is college baseball that's more popular, I would say, than like American college baseball. It's still, there's these 6 colleges that have a long history, again, because baseball was initiated through students. So college and high school students have the longest history playing baseball in Japan. I don't know what, it's just not as widespread. I mean, a lot of kids don't end up playing baseball in college. You know, for most of the baseball population in Japan, high school is it, unless you have, you know, not to say actual talent, but like you can play high school baseball if you want to. And then after that, it gets quite serious in a way. So there's just not as much of, you know, it's not broadcast on TV. It's never been, you know, weighed as important as high school baseball, I would say.
Yeah, I also think that the purity of the players and their youth is really part of the charm of the sport, and how they appear and then for one summer as seniors and then disappear like cherry blossom. Is a bit of a cliche, but I think it is a beautiful thing. Kind of the you know, the fact that that once it's over, you lose in a day and it's gone, you know. So I think it would be hard to replicate that again at the college level. And then I think just also as a matter of kind of historical chance, the way this tournament was grown by the Asahi Shimbun really from almost 100 years ago, it grew into a major kind of public event, and probably there was no space for college baseball to grow in the same way in the market.
Mhm. And this seems like a natural follow-up question to that asked by Pick, which is there an equivalent program for girls?
No, unfortunately not. There is a slightly growing population of girls playing baseball, and there has, even in the past year, been an effort to let them play in Koshien, because there's always a few teams across the country and they have their own national tournament, but it wouldn't be at Koshien, and that's slightly changed. Like this past year, the final game of the girls baseball was played at Koshien, but I don't know how many people in Japan would know that. I know that, but it's just not, you know, the population and the importance is very low. You'll notice the absence of girls and women in Koshien, and although I do feel like, you know, someone like Mizutani exists thanks to someone like his mother and sister and wife and various women in his life that kind of allow for his lifestyle. Like we did try to film like the girl managers of the team, and we did that kind of thing, but it was a lot of the stereotypes that you might imagine of just a gender difference, and so we left that out. But yeah, I think it's a growing thing. As for example, the Otani school, Hanamaki Higashi High School, has a very strong girls baseball team, and so there are a few, but not nearly to the scale of the boys.
Yeah, Sasaki is actually growing his daughter as a female baseball player. So we'll see how successful she is. But his oldest son, who's now in his second year at Hanamaki, is actually the biggest star now in Japanese high school baseball. So he's being called the Japanese Babe Ruth. He's enormous. He's like 120 kilos. And he's already broken all of Otani's home run records in high school just in his second year.
Wow.
So this will be an interesting story to follow.
Yeah, he's being called the next Otani. So his name is Rintaro Sasaki. So if you want to follow something this summer or the next year or two, that might be an exciting. He's not in our film. He's not Mizutani's son. He's Sasaki's son, but something that's going on now.
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible. You know, we have a superstar in the making here, who is Seiya Suzuki, and I noticed that he was drafted right out of high school, right? So, you know, maybe continuing baseball in college maybe isn't quite the tradition. There's just so many directions we could go in with this, but and I do want to talk more about Mizutani because I find him just a really interesting, complex character. But I was wondering, since we're talking about women, how was it for you as a woman filmmaker making a film about a very male, you know, centric discipline? I bet you were the only woman in the room a lot of the times. How was that?
Yeah, I think it made the experience unique and hopefully the film unique to a degree. I mean, there were moments where you know, I mean, I was constantly aware of that, and especially dealing with, you know, 16, 17-year-old boys who I might have been the first woman they were like interacting with in different ways. And sometimes they were shy and sometimes they were excited. And I tried to, you know, use that, you know, to my advantage. I wasn't their friend. I wasn't a teacher or anything. I had this unique relationship with them that I think included my gender. And I think in the more adult world, the coaches and just all the adults involved were also very male centric. And I think at times I appreciated that Eric was always, you know, there kind of making sure everybody knew I was the director. There was often a automatic idea that like, you know, like maybe that, you know, they just didn't know us. They weren't as equipped, I think, to like know how to interact with women because they always had men around. But I didn't really find it as a hindrance. I just tried to use it as an advantage with the relationships I built with various people. And yeah, and I think I wouldn't say I became one of the boys with the boys, but I just developed this relationship that I think included my, I was at the time maybe about 10 years older than them. I think it was this unique experience, and also being so not looking so non-Japanese, we tried to offer something special to them because we were also asking a lot of them to share with us. So I used all the parts of my identity to make that happen.
I think also, I don't know how many people in the audience have watched a Koshien post-game interview, or even like a sumo post-game interview, but the players really stick to the company line in how they respond. And usually. And so I think Ema, by virtue of who she is, not just being female, but also being kind of a filmmaker from the outside in part, and also our American cameraman, like the characters in our film felt very much unjudged in the moment when we were interviewing them. So they gave us much more complex emotions and answers than they would ordinarily give to TV cameras, let's say, in post-game interviews.
Oh, that's interesting.
This one scene where the captain of Mizutani's team is really at a low point and he's saying, I can't eat, I can't sleep, like he would never say that if it was not us. Like as a captain, he could never have shared that with any kind of a media. But at that point, I think he felt so, he didn't even think twice. Like we were there every day and we were supporting him, and he just felt comfortable to just share what he was feeling versus having a kind of armor around him. So that's what we aim to do. And that's why you have to be with them for many, many days, even though the film ultimately will only show a little bit of that.
Right. I think you can see the trust there in the film. I want to go into that a little more, but first, I'm assuming that you are bilingual. You speak both English and Japanese.
Yep.
So you were acting as the interpreter for everyone?
To a degree. I mean, I would just communicate in Japanese. Eric speaks Japanese too. I was doing most of the interaction with, the students and the coaches. So our camera person was an American guy called Michael Comet, who doesn't speak any Japanese. It was his first time in Japan to film this film. And we chose to do that because we wanted to make sure, like for him coming to Japan and seeing shoes in a straight line or helmets in a perfect line was so moving. Whereas a Japanese camera person it would be so normal. they wouldn't even comment on it. So we really leaned on Michael to accentuate that outside perspective and be moved or notice things that he wasn't used to. And yeah, sometimes we had some signals to make sure he knew that, because he didn't know what anybody was saying. But it's amazing, right? Like actually what he can do. And you notice that what's being said is maybe only sometimes a part of what's being communicated. And he always was able to figure out what emotions was going on and what seemed important to film.
I mean, did you establish that sort of trust relationship with the players fairly quickly? Seems like it, but
it's there was, what we try to do is, what I like to say is that you want to become like part of the air that is breathed in an environment, and to do that it just takes time. And also there's different, especially with kids, they react differently. Some kids like the attention, other kids don't want to be bothered, and somewhere in between. So you kind of gauge that out in the first couple of weeks, and by the time it's, so that everybody's comfortable and with the distance, whether it's close or far, that we're taking from them, so that when you don't get picked for the team, or when your team loses, by that point in the story, no one is even thinking about it. And that's either because we're not going to the, if someone doesn't want to be filmed, we already know that. And then we also know the kids who they don't even see this massive camera in front of them anymore. And so it takes a little while, but that's part of what's necessary. And that's why, especially in the spring, there's we probably filmed them eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner like every day for weeks, and it's not in the film, but it's just kind of just being there for the dull things to make sure that they're comfortable when something abnormal or dramatic happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's some scenes where they go on a road trip and they're all just sort of hanging out in their underwear in the big like tatami room with all
Yeah,
their
at
beds
that
together.
point, yeah, they did. And I think again, like, because most of us look so foreign, even though we were speaking Japanese, like with the camera guy, I think sometimes like the kids were like, well, he doesn't know what we're saying. And they just forget that idea that they'll eventually know what they're saying. But I think they were just really relaxed. It wasn't some, older like crew with like, in suits or something that they used to with the more TV media. So I think we created that environment.
I think that also naturally you gravitate to the characters who are most unguarded and natural, because there are a lot of people when they start to be filmed for a documentary that they put on a front, and you either wait until for that front to wear off, or you kind of give up on them as potential characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was wondering about the level of self-consciousness going on in filmmaking, and as documentarians, I think you do have to be patient, right, and just kind of wait until you can get through.
Yeah, and our strategy is to, I think if, when you only have a chance to go and film someplace for a few days and they know you'll be gone in a few days or you're not coming back until another month or something, it's easy to turn on and off, versus if you're there every day all the time, there comes a point where the coach can be like, well, I can't just like not be strict the whole time they're here. I mean, Mizutani was always like that, but even for the other teams, some of the other coaches, maybe they would feel like they don't want to be filmed at their most strictest, being self-conscious. But if you're there every day, there comes a point where you just have to be yourself, and the same with the kids. So that's our strategy, so to make sure that we're actually filming what's actually who actually people are versus what they can hold up for a few days.
Mm-hmm. Alan says, good job being invisible.
Yeah. And that's really, that was quite, I had many choices, and, I intentionally, for example, at the very end, during the end credits, you hear my voice for the first time asking Mizutani a question about, if he wants his son to go to Koshien. He's like, no, I want to go to Koshien. And that's a conscious choice maybe at the end to just share with whoever's watching the film that it was someone, like, maybe the people will be surprised that it was a female director, for example, kind of, but I didn't want that to be like part of the main film. And so that was like a little bit of showing it, but some films, sometimes you hear the director, or we made a conscious choice to just stay out of it. So we felt like we were just, we always have a hand in the matter, but to not have that in the forefront.
Mm-hmm. We're just getting tons of comments in the chat. I'm so pleased. So I'm trying to read and listen and talk at the same time. We are seeing some comments about Coach Mizutani Kan. Isn't it funny? Kantoku is used for director and also for coach, right?
Yeah. So I'm a kantoku, he's a kantoku. It got funny sometimes, but I always refer to him as kantoku. Like during this project, I was never said, no one ever called me kantoku because there were too many kantokus around me. But
are you bossy?
Me?
Yeah.
Depends on who you ask.
I think to be a film director, I think you have to have a degree of being in, having control and bossing people around. That's kind of negative, but I think you kind of need to know what you want and be a good communicator, which hopefully I try to do.
Good answer. What did you think of Coach Mizutani?
Coach Mizutani was the first time in my career until then that I was making someone a main character that I didn't fully agree with or fully, I understood him and empathized with him, but it's easier to make films, I think, about someone that you fully inspired by and you believe in them. And that's typically, unless you're making like a film about a public figure and you're trying to criticize them, that's typically how you choose your subject matter and the characters. And I think for Mizutani, being with him for on and off for a year, I got to really understand him and where he was coming from. And I had a lot of empathy for him because I also know a lot of people like that in that generation of Japanese men where they were raised with certain values. And in the past few years, all of a sudden, in a way, they're being told that, no, you can't, I mean, it seems so obvious now, but, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was like, no, you can't hit your students anymore. And then it's just like, no, you can't be so verbally abusive, and you have to keep adapting, and what's acceptable in society keeps changing. And yet for a generation of people, that's all they've known, and that's all they've known how to, like, that's what they received growing up, and that's also what they've done for maybe 2 decades. And so I saw in him someone that was struggling to adapt and to change, and sometimes I would be shocked by some things he would say to a 16-year-old boy, and I would be horrified. But also I saw that he cared so much about his students, and what we didn't have room for in the film is that the fact that he, make sure the kids have a future, that he facilitates getting them in colleges or jobs, or he really has a lifelong relationship with the kids that, if the kids like it or not, they kind of like, he feels like he should take care of them for the rest of their lives and things like that. So, but of course there were like, he was a very complex character, and I think the fact that you have to get the door. Sorry, we just have a package. The fact that he lost the way he did, really, I didn't have to say much more. I think the day I had to lost so dramatically was a horrifying day for me as a director, because I just wasn't prepared. But looking back, the fact that someone like him running a team the way he does could no longer win, not only could not make it to Koshien, but couldn't win one game that summer, says a lot about, I think, the times and his style and his mentality. And the fact that his disciple, who's taking the best of maybe Mizutani's ways, but also adapting appropriately to the times, could make it to Koshien. I think the results of that season's baseball said a lot about what I was feeling like. I don't know what I would have done, actually. I feel like if Mizutani had gone to Koshien that summer, as much as I was cheering the team, like, what would that say about Japan right now? Are we still kind of, it's very much like militaristic post-war era. Are we still, are those teams still the ones that do the best? And it's no longer the case. So I think we're able to capture kind of that turning point through this very complex man's lifelong dream being slightly shattered. Yeah.
I know Eric said that the players are really good at towing the company line, but just as you got to know the players, did any of them kind of monku behind his back about him to you?
I mean, the coaches, the kids were like very scared of Mizutani. And I think that's an indication that was one of the things I think that worked in Japan in schools and companies until like maybe the 90s, like my like the idea of fear drilling your motivation or things. And I think that's really rapidly changing. So you could tell the kids were afraid of him, afraid to make mistakes. And that resulted in massive errors during important games. And then, he pulls out his players once they make a mistake, which isn't something, for example, Sasaki does. That was a big difference. So yeah, they did moan a lot about Mizutani, but also they had a lot of like, he had a lot of respect from a lot of them too. And I think what's good about high school baseball these days is that if you want to go to a strict school like that, ahead of time, like the kids and parents who went to Mizutani's school knew what he was about. And if you wanted a little bit more of a relaxed experience in high school baseball, you could have had other choices. So I think especially the parents knew what they were getting into with their son and the coach. So at least there was an alignment there that causes like a sudden mentality that you're just going to deal with this for 3 years.
Mm-hmm. That just brought to mind, does social media play a role in high school baseball these days?
Yes, to a degree. I think also more in the past few years than 2018 even. But for high school baseball kids, they can't use their phone. They're not allowed to tweet, they're not allowed to Instagram. That was like a major rule in many teams we observed, not just the 2 teams we filmed. So they tried to limit, like, there's a lot of restrictions with being a high school baseball player, and at least their participation is limited. And then of course fans and people can comment on freely, but yeah, they have that restriction.
So there was kind of a generational divide, right, between Mizutani, the older coach, and the younger coach. Is that Sasaki?
Sasaki, yeah.
So have you noticed, or do you have a premonition about what the coming generations of high school baseball are going to look like? Is it going to be, no shaved heads and more lenient, and do you see that coming?
Well, it's been interesting to observe since it's been a few years since we made the film, and Sasaki ending the shaved heads rule for his team was a massive moment in high school baseball history. He wasn't the first team, but he was the first significant team, a team of influence to do so. And surprisingly, or maybe not, I was surprised, but you might be surprised to hear that within 2 years after that, Mizutani ended the shaved heads rule for his team. So now even his team doesn't necessarily have to have shaved heads. And I can't help but think that his son coming home with longer hair, but still being a good baseball player, had an influence in that. And I was noted, like, I think, if you see high school baseball this summer, or at least recently I saw that there's maybe 20-25% of teams now at that highest level, the ones that make it to Koshien, don't have shaved heads. So it's really a tilt. And they don't have long hair either. It's pretty short, but it doesn't have to be. So there's like that shift. I think what I thought while I was making the film was whoever wins Koshien every summer sets the trend for the future of high school baseball. So if a super strict team wins, then that'll be like the trendsetter. If like a team that looks like they're having a lot of fun, but somehow is good, that might be the trend. And so I think it's not like all of a sudden the baseball kids are going to start acting like soccer kids, but there's little shifts like that. And I think it's always on essence, like, things haven't changed. If you watch Koshien this summer, you might think it's quite similar to our film, but I think there are subtle changes happening. People are more concerned about how many pitches a pitcher throws in a certain time and things like that. So we'll see. What I was relieved to see is that we did see teams in our year following high school baseball that have given up on the kind of, well, to put it simply, their shoes were a mess. They weren't in line. They were just, they didn't seem to care about things being in order as much, or kind of like that discipline and kind of the orderliness of what makes high school baseball, I think, quite unique. And I was a bit disappointed in that, and the fact that a team like that hasn't done quite well yet, because it's understandable. I think, even in the US, right, like who would think that putting your shoes in line can correlate, like, it doesn't have to correlate with being a good baseball player, but I think that's kind of important, or at least kind of keeping with tradition. So I was worried that year if a team like that won Koshien, but they didn't. So that's one thing I hope that like can keep kind of that basic respect towards them, the surroundings, and kind of linking like being a good human to being a good baseball player, even if it's not necessarily all logical, as a good way of educating, growing the next generation.
I think also, Emma mentioned earlier choosing Koshien as a microcosm of Japanese society. And I think that maybe more so than other sports, high school baseball does reflect the changes in Japanese society. So the society, I think, at least in our view, is liberalizing in many ways. And you can see it. There are different kinds of, for example, diversity pushes here through NHK, through the mainstream media, that has to do with LGBT, that has to do with gender, has to do with indigenous peoples, Ainu, for example. And you can see it also in the everyday society and the values of the youth. So when we were on the field at Hayato, for example, you could just see a huge contrast between the lives of the baseball kids who had to shave their head, couldn't use their cell phones, had to maintain this discipline, and then down the field, the soccer kids who look so free. They look like soccer kids in the US, basically, with long hair, and just the difference in values was so stark. So, you know, the baseball population in Japan is shrinking slowly, but it's shrinking. And it feels like if the society continues to liberalize and young kids continue to liberalize, we could probably very easily see the baseball population continuing to decline. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, for any society, I mean, especially at that age, the more kids can choose for themselves, the more they will probably choose the soccer route, I think, in the future. So with some exceptions, naturally, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of agree with Emma, though. It would make me very sad if some of the rituals disappeared. Like I'm very proud of this Japanese tradition of cleaning. And so do you still see high school players sort of picking up dirt off of the field?
Yeah, of course. And picking up trash. I mean, it's like I think it's been a few years now, but when was the last World Cup? Was that maybe 2018 while we were filming? And there was this big news headline that Japanese supporters were cleaning up their trash in the stadiums after their games. And it's just like, yes, it's not just high school baseball kids. Like, this is a thing that somehow part of being educated in Japan is like, you know, if you clean up, then good things might happen. Like, you know, and if you really think about it, it's kind of like, you know, you might, of course, like it's just kind of a superstition, but I think that's, if it works and it ends up with kind of better people and a cleaner society, I think those things are worth kind of, you know, keeping on to, even if it doesn't make sense that, oh, maybe, you know, these kids were like, if I clean up this trash, like I'll hit a hit, or they think like, you know, if I walk by a piece of trash and then I don't hit a hit, I'm gonna like blame myself for not picking up that trash, which is, you know, it gets to a point where it's not that healthy, but I think to a degree it's like a good way for young people to be.
Emma's new project, by the way, our new project is A Year in a Japanese Elementary School, and it's very much about these themes. Yeah, we just finished shooting, so.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow. That reminds me, there's this new show on Netflix called Old Enough.
Yeah.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Very cute. So anything involving little kids is gonna be a winner, I think. Okay, so this is such a great conversation. I want to point out to everyone in our audience, please read the chat if you have a chance, because we are getting some really, really great comments, and I'm sorry. I apologize that I'm not able to get through all of them, and I may not get to everyone's questions. But I'll try to keep things sort of integrated, and we will save the chat afterwards. So Emma and Eric, we can send you the comments after our meeting, so you can hear what people's thoughts were. One of the questions, though, that I saw was the question of what did the coaches and players think of your documentary after it came out?
Yeah, I think they all had this surreal experience. I mean, I can not imagine being in their shoes to have kind of their story or parts of their story being played back on the big screen, on whether it was on national TV where millions saw it, or also in theaters, and they came and saw. And I think, I mean, generally everybody was very pleased and very moved. It's of course very important for me that, you know, everybody feels like it was a authentic kind of version of themselves. I think for Mizutani, I mean, I can't even imagine for him, like seeing his story pieced together from his parents' story through to his son's story, through to his, you know, disciple Sasaki's story, you know, in this heartbreaking year. I'm sure it wasn't easy, but he came to watch it like 5 times or something in the theater. I think he just, and actually, you know, we haven't really had a chance to talk about Mizutani's mother and sister, especially his sister, who is quite.
I think.
Yes, hi Ben. Go ahead, Emma.
Oh, okay. but his sister, I mean, when we visited his hometown when the film was playing in theater, and his sister said, I've never, after she saw the film, said, I've never seen my brother in this light. I finally feel like I can love him, which was a very powerful thing she said. And I think him hearing that also through us, not their family is beyond, they have lots of other problems. I'm not saying that fixed everything, but it was just nice that, to hear that kind of comment from someone so involved in our film. And I think for the kids who are now, 21, 22, reflecting on their experience of high school baseball, and the main kids that we filmed still play baseball, and Captain is trying to become a pro, and Mizutani's son is trying to go pro and things like this, but also other kids that was it for them. They don't play baseball anymore, and I think it'll be forever, an experience they cherished, and for them, unlike thousands of other kids, it's also captured the way, because we did. So I think it was a very special experience for them.
Mm-hmm. And how was it received by the Japanese audience watching this documentary?
Yeah, it's funny because I think we made the film for an international audience, and then because of COVID, actually, we had this unexpected opportunity to have it in theaters in Japan. There were other versions of the project that had already aired on NHK. So it wasn't necessarily the plan for this version that you all saw to be played in Japan. But it's so interesting because in Japan, people already have such an opinion about high school baseball. There's also linked to how they view Japanese society, whether it's too strict or not strict enough, or these kind of societal opinions. So I feel like people saw what they wanted to see through the film. So we got comments ranging from, oh, this is, a great criticism of the militaristic style of Japan, like, you've exposed this. And also like people being like, wow, what a wonderful, showing the treasure and traditions of, this wonderful culture. So we got everything from each side. And I also think for Japan, where documentary films are still quite not at the same level frequently as what you would expect in the US, where NHK leads in this kind of narration-based storytelling that's also somewhat like news informational versus an experience. I think people saw our film kind of like the way the story was put together was like a new experience for them, and they also appreciated that.
So one of the questions, Mizutani's son still is playing for Sasaki's team, right?
So no, he graduated.
Okay.
Mizutani's son made it to Koshien in his sophomore year and
Wow.
senior year. And then now he's in university at one of the 6 universities I mentioned earlier that play intense baseball. And I think in the next 2 years, we'll see how much he improves, and he'll either have a chance to be drafted, or maybe he'll continue in like a amateur team as an adult. I think he's very much still dedicated to playing baseball for as long as he can.
And their team, Hanamaki Higashi, that's in Iwate Prefecture. And one of our questions is, how were they affected by the earthquake and tsunami in 2011?
Yeah, they're in Iwate, they're not by the coast. So there wasn't, of course, there was earthquake damage, but that was actually when Otani was in that school. He was there at the time, but nothing so like devastating as you know from the coasts of Iwate. So that's what I know about that time. Yeah.
Okay, and we've got so many questions, so I'm trying to catch up, but since you did mention Coach Mizutani's mother and sister, I really do have to come back to that, because that whole dynamic was really fascinating to me. And the relationship you were talking about between Coach Mizutani and his players, we don't see that with his family or his own kids or his, he doesn't have he's the oldest son, right? He's the Cho.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't feel a sense of obligation to take over the family business. And one of our earlier commenters, Reed, compared this to Monk by Blood, where the son feels a very strong obligation, right? Even though he would like to do other things, he decides to continue the temple. Whereas Mizutani just says, I don't want to do that. My passion is baseball, so I'm going to, let go of the family business and pursue this thing, and I'm going to focus on my baseball player kids and not on my own biological kids. I mean, did you sense, I guess there was family tension, right? The sister was feeling kind of angry about it, and the wife sort of would say things here and there that kind of showed she wasn't too happy about it. But what has happened to the family since then? Do you think he'll ever go back to the family business?
I don't, not at this point. I think even when we saw his mom last year, she was like, I'm still waiting, she's still running the company at 88 years old or something. And I'm still waiting for him. I think the sister, and we were like, I don't think he's coming back. It sounds like Mizutani is grooming his other son, the older son, not Kosho, to maybe get involved with the family company, as which I also don't feel like is, like he's kind of like, well, I'm not going back, so take my son. But I think it's so and yeah, the wife commenting, I mean, clearly he didn't have much of a hand in raising his kid in terms of like the daily years, and the fact that he never seen his own son play baseball, because every time there's a game on the weekends, he would. Even when his son played at Koshien after we finished filming, we went to see the team, but Mizutani said that he was too busy because he had a game of his own and didn't even see his own son play at Koshien. So, and I think at that point it's more like a stance than like he could have made time, I think. But I think it's again, a generational thing. That's why we thought he represented so much. It's a personal story about Mizutani, but I think it's a story about Japan with, again, it's true that he did defy his parents' expectations, but that also happens. And I think that's why, but this idea of like the parents working really hard after the war to build something and then setting up this life for the kids, and like, the daughter decided to, stick it out, but the son kind of running off to play baseball or coach baseball. But I think that's why he takes it so seriously. He knows that he's burdening a lot of other people to follow his dream. And that's why I think he's very serious every year to produce results and try to make it to Koshien, and it's devastating when he doesn't, not just because of the community of the school that will be disappointed, but he knows like people are expecting results out of him from his hometown because he's done this thing. And so it's very much, I think, and this idea of like the dad really not being involved with his family because of his job was like a very common thing, I believe, in Japan until recently. So it just seemed to represent a lot of like what was normal in Japan, for better or for worse. I think now that his son Kosho has blossomed as a baseball player, we'll see if he's good enough to go pro, but he definitely made it to a certain point where he will be known as a reputable young baseball player. I think that's a big relief for everyone. And I think Mizutani is very proud of that even, and very grateful for his disciple Sasaki to raise him that way. And yeah, I think hopefully the other son will relieve his mother of the duties of this big lumber company sometime soon. But yeah.
We planted in the film this idea of hataraki kata kaikaku, basically, which was in the year that we were shooting Koshien, a major topic in society, the idea of changing the way that people work so that they don't have to work. And so there were a number of cases of people overworking and dying. And so there was a kind of societal wide conversation about, yes, this kind of work may have been necessary in the post-war period to build Japan back up. But now that we're a wealthy country in the 21st century, we're becoming more progressive. Do people have to work as hard? Do we have to sacrifice certain elements of the individual experience to grow the society? So the film, although it's about baseball, it's very, very much about this generational change from the generation not just Mizutani, but his mother's generation as well, that built this wealthy Japan in the second half of the 20th century, giving away to new generations who will take the country in a different direction in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also, to what extent can Japan adapt some maybe looser Western practices, and in what ways can the Western world learn from Japan's practices? I think it would be good to sort of share and sort of become the best of both worlds kind of thing. You're right. I think that even with this, and I can tell just from the comments that I'm reading from all of our viewers, is that this documentary is about more than just high school baseball, right? There's just so many layers to it. And I haven't even begun to touch everyone's questions about it. So I kind of apologize. I think what I will do, and our conversation has just flown by, it's 20 minutes to the hour. So if I can, I want to switch our discussion maybe to talking about more recent things that you've been working on. And then I'd like to save some time at the end and let everyone open up their mics. And then we'd like to hear from the audience and either, tell us about your experiences in Japan growing up with Koshien, or ask your questions directly to Eric and Emma. So let's try to do that. So I do want to ask, you mentioned that you're working on this new series about a year at, is it kindergarten?
Yeah, elementary school.
Oh, okay, elementary school. So that's going to be, is that for television?
That'll be similar to the Koshien route, where we'll make TV versions for NHK, but hopefully it'll be a international feature version. The concept is the making of a Japanese, this idea that in, at least my theory, that in the 6 years of elementary school, you really learn what it means to become Japanese through cleaning your own classrooms and serving each other lunch. And so we follow the incoming first graders and outgoing sixth graders for a year. And we just finished that school year, and I'm dealing with 700 hours of footage that I will put together during this summer.
Before or after you have the baby?
Both.
Yeah, you're going to be very busy. And any other projects that are in the works?
Should I talk about Temple Family? Or?
Sure.
I mean, this is all things that we've done recently that you've also alluded to, but my first film out of film school, I made this short documentary called Monk by Blood about a temple family in Kyoto, who, 24 generations of firstborn sons taking over for 800 years. And I happen to know the person who was next in line, a guy called Sean, that actually grew up in California for the first 9 years of his life. And so very international, but has this kind of duty. And the first film was about him at 21 years old, debating if he's going to take over or become a chef or a DJ. We spent last year filming the sequel to that short film. So 8 or 9 years later, as Sean has decided to take over, he married a beautiful wife who decided to also become a monk. But the whole temple is very international, very progressive, and a lot of the women in the temple, his sisters, his mother, have a very strong role. So that was something that came out on NHK last year that you can all see. And then the goal is in maybe 8 or 9 years again, when it's time for him to actually take over from his father, we'll film again and maybe make a long feature film out of the 20 years of this temple. And I think it's a way, and maybe I can keep going until, him and I are very similar age. So maybe I'll do like a lifelong project and see the changes in Japanese society through this temple community. But
I love that. I was hoping that you would make another sequel following Temple Family, because I can't wait to find out how this family does. And yeah, it could be like the 7 Up series, where you just
yes, exactly.
Yeah. and so, yes, I gave out the links to watch those films to everybody, but if you did not get those links, then email me or Jill and we can send those links again. Really, really worthwhile to watch those. How has it been making films during COVID?
Well, Japan has had a much better time overall, compared to the US. Of course, things were shut down in the beginning, and actually that's when our elementary school film was supposed to start filming, so everything got canceled and then postponed. So actually that's why we decided to do things like the Temple Family Project later on that year. That was a smaller scale. We knew everybody already and they were comfortable with us coming. Also the Rickshaw Man project that you mentioned earlier on, and when you introduced us, which was, Eric was producing this restoration of a 1943 film called Rickshaw Man that is known to be one of the only films that was made during wartime in Japan that wasn't a propaganda film. It was very like a human, heartfelt film that, a lot of the people involved who made the film kind of took risks and defied certain expectations and rules. It was not an anti-war film necessarily, but kind of to take a stand as creatives, also not knowing when they might be called to go to war. And when I heard about, and also the film was censored multiple times, once from the Japanese government during the war, and then actually from the American GHQ side after the war for different reasons. So it has a very unique history that you wouldn't necessarily know about unless you learned about it. So it just seemed like it made sense for me to make an accompanying short documentary that not only followed the restoration process during COVID by this person, Miyajima, who was an assistant to the camera person who shot this film, and he was dedicated to do the restoration even if he took some risks himself, but also to share some of the background of this wartime film. And again, that was a lot of archival footage. I used some animation like I did with the Curious George film. So we found projects that were easier to do during COVID that didn't involve 1,000 kids in elementary school. But we were able to do those things pretty safely and pretty robustly, I would say. And I think at this point, I guess in the US too, but people have figured out ways to make films even during these times.
Amazing. So I am officially inviting you back because I want to show, is it called Wheels of Fate?
Mm-hmm.
I want to show that, and I want to hear more about this project because I only knew about the 1958. It was directed by Hiroshi Inagaki. And I knew about the color version with Mifune Toshiro and Takamine Hideko.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize there was an earlier version. And I am wondering why it's not here in Berkeley showing at the Pacific Film Archive. So I would like to talk to you about bringing it to Berkeley, and we would love to have you back as guests to talk about that if you would like.
We would love that. We would love that. The restoration of the 1943 version, I think, will be released on Criterion in maybe this year, maybe next year, hopefully along with our short. So it just premiered for the first time at MoMA in January, but we can definitely help facilitate a live screening for sure of the two at Berkeley if it's something you guys want to do. And I think we would love to come back and talk about it for sure.
Yay, I think we could do this. I think this can happen. And then there's another Berkeley connection, which is Carol and Jill mentioned that in Monk by Blood, there was some footage. Does that take place in Berkeley? Do you know?
So I don't think there's any footage, but the father of the temple, so Sean's father, who also is the current head priest, the reason the whole family was in California was he studied at Berkeley for, I think, almost a decade to try to studying the perspective of Buddhism from a different side from Japan. So that's why his family lived in California for almost a decade until Sean's grandfather passed and they had to move back to take over the temple. So yeah, there's definitely a Berkeley connection there.
Wow. Okay. Good catch, Carol. gee, let's see. And you had also mentioned that you know, you'd like to work on projects outside of Japan or beyond Japan, or you know, like is there some dream project you wanna work on?
I think in recent years, you know, after kind of my intense decade in New York, where I really wasn't tied into anything much Japanese, I was kind of in the, you know, I worked for people like Ken Burns and the very American stories. And then I realized maybe something I can do more uniquely based on my life experiences is to tell these more complicated, nuanced stories about Japan that aren't just about sushi or anime or these things that have become so known about Japan, and also maybe bringing projects from outside of Japan to a Japanese audience, or you know, another film we did recently was, you know, there's a Japanese person that has been very involved in the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. That's a very well-known, predominantly African-American modern dance company. And this person called Chaya was part of the organization for 47 years. And he's a Japanese guy who went over to New York in 1970 and made it as a dancer, and then was Alvin Ailey's right-hand person for and then basically took care of the company in many ways after Mr. Ailey passed. So we made a documentary about him, for example, that was mostly for a Japanese audience who didn't know much about Chaya. I think eventually, now that we've had a few years in Japan and we've been able to make a base here and kind of, you know, have ways to tell stories about Japan, I just don't want to just do that. I think I'm just like the Curious George film. I think when some story comes my way and I find it interesting, whether it's about Japan or not, I'm interested in kind of people and societies and why things are the way they are. And I saw in the comment someone commenting about the style of filmmaking. I don't really necessarily have a message I'm trying to send across. Like there are a lot of activist filmmakers that, you know, care about something, and I care about things too, but I'm not trying to impose a certain view through the films. I think I'm trying to present how things are connected. For example, with the Koshien film, that, you know, I don't know if this is too strict or not, but I know that in Japan trains run on time. And so if you like the trains running on time, but you think Koshien is too strict, then see the discrepancy there. Maybe if Koshien is less strict, the trains will be late in 30 years. Like presenting these ideas as suggestions is something I'm interested in. I think the ultimate dream project I always like to mention is making the definitive film about Ichiro Suzuki, my hero, not only as a baseball player, but what he's done so much in Japan and in the US culturally, that I think maybe our backgrounds, you know, are kind of suited to like do a good job with that if the opportunity arises. But so these are the kind of things I'm interested in moving forward.
Wow, have you met Ichiro?
I mean, you have to define meeting, right? I haven't met him, but he's never met me. So I've been in his presence at baseball parks a lot. But I'm waiting for the right way, because I've really graduated now from being an obsessive fan that I was for 20 years to try to position myself to be a presentable film director that might want to tell his life story. So I've really had to adjust mentally. And I think hopefully in due course, I'll have a chance to meet him, not just as a fan, but someone who's serious about keeping his, you know, making a project that our future grandkids could see, that, you know, tells the story of this great baseball player.
Mm-hmm. You have a website, don't you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you put the address in the chat so that
Sure.
people can sort of follow your activities? People are asking how they can see your films. Like, is Chaya, the Alvin Ailey documentary, is that available?
Is it
not outside of Japan,
yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah, at the moment, because of basically rights issues. So
we could probably do a special screening of it. There's an English version, but yeah, sometime, because there has been other Ailey films out in the US that we only have the rights for Japan. But yeah, like we could do like maybe a special screening if has a lot of, I know that Ailey is very popular on the West Coast as well. So
okay, well, yeah, we'll compare calendars and I'll see how many times I can sign you up. Eric, do you have a dream project?
Whatever Emma's dreams are my dreams these days. No, I'm also separate from Emma, working mostly on narrative films. So actually we just finished shooting a period film in Iwate based on the legends of Tono, which are folk tales from Iwate. And it's also a project with NHK whereby it'll be a primetime drama on NHK, but then we'll have a feature-length film version that will play internationally and then in Japanese theaters as well. It's with a director called Takeshi Fukunaga, who I work with on a film called Ainu Mosir, which if anybody has Netflix out there, it's streaming on American Netflix at the moment. But Ainu Mosir is what's referred to as a hybrid narrative film, meaning that it's scripted fiction, but the characters are playing a version of themselves, and they're all Ainu people around Lake Akan in Hokkaido. So it's it also, like Koshien, which we haven't told this story yet, but Koshien and Ainu Mosir both were finished and just before COVID, and we planned to have theatrical releases of them in the US. But because of the pandemic, we had to give up on that for both projects. So in the case of Koshien, we were quite fortunate that ESPN approached us and gave us a platform to show the film in a broad way. And now it's available online, and we're starting to do some events like these, interacting with audiences, and hopefully eventually to show the film in person. But Ainu Mosir went through a similar process. So we had hoped to do a theatrical release, but it wasn't possible in 2020, and so we went for a Netflix deal instead, essentially. So it's available on Netflix now. But I would love you guys to watch, this audience to watch that project as well, because I'm quite proud.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody watch Ainu Mosir, which is on Netflix right now. And I want to mention, I can't read the whole chat, but Joy Hashiba Sekimura put something in the chat. She's Nagiko Hashiba's daughter.
Yeah.
And says, thank you for interviewing my mother for your Idaten interview in 2019. And we have other people in the audience too. I think we have Yuriko Romer. I think she signed on. She's working on a baseball documentary, Diamond Diplomacy. And we'd love to hear from Yuriko about how that is progressing. And so I'm going to invite everyone just in the last few moments to unmute yourselves, and then let's just yell out any questions or comments you have. But before that happens, thank you, Emma and Eric, for being our guests and spending so much time with us. This was super special, and we learned so much. So thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you. No, it was great. We love doing this. We could go on forever, and we appreciate all the comments. We've been reading them, and just, doing these projects is to make sure people watch them and to think about things. And I feel like this community has definitely done that with our work, and we really appreciate that.
So if you don't mind just hanging around for a couple more minutes, I'll just let people try to grab your attention. So everybody unmute yourselves and say thank you or anything you want. And yeah, big applause.
Thank you. It's great seeing you, Emma and Eric.
Yes, it's great to see you too.
You've done such good work. Really amazing.
I'm Sadako Kashiwagi, Soji's mom.
Oh, hi.
Hi. And, I've been watching a lot of Japanese TV. And I first came across Koshien and Gotsuso-sama.
Ah.
That series. And then I noticed that, as I say, I watch a lot of Japanese TV, and that the young people are not necessarily doing the lifetime, kaisha career.
Yeah.
More and more people are, some of them at least, are going to isolated villages and helping to review and restore, and even doing environmental things with them. And I think that it's really, really nice. And yeah, Japanese TV has saved my sanity during this COVID. Really has. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sawako. Don't we have some people who grew up in Japan who grew up with Koshien? Did you want to share some of those views with Don't be shy, guys. Speak up.
Mute.
Hi, it's me. Hi, Kathy.
Yeah, who's this?
Yeah, so Minako.
Oh, hi, Minako.
Konnichiwa. Hi. So I mentioned to Jill, I went to high school in Tokyo. It's called Minami, Tokyo To Minami High School. And the high school I went didn't have a baseball team. It was a very new high school. And I was only the third graduating class. It was built in the middle of nowhere. And we had, as Eric mentioned, we had a soccer team, rugby, and basketball and volleyball. And so anyway, but generally speaking, Koshien baseball brought everyone a kind of annual event that brought them a joy. And it was always so refreshing to watch these young boys' innocent faces every summer. So I think my parents, my siblings, everyone enjoyed. And thanks for making this film.
Thank you.
And in terms of ethical, this pep talk from Coach Mizutani, it's something that kind of I was horrified. To be honest, horrified is maybe a bit word, but I really admire the kids who followed their pursuit in spite of such a strict rules and regulations. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minako.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric and Ema さん。ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。
Eric, when did you learn Japanese?
So I grew up in New York City, and then I went to Japan on the JET program when I was 21, which is an international exchange program, mostly for teaching English. So I was teaching English in Gifu in a high school in the countryside for 1 year. And then I moved to Tokyo and I studied at Keio University for a year. And then I had a number of jobs kind of looking for myself in Japan, writing papers for diplomats and different kinds of things. But you mentioned at the top, my father was involved in this, and still is, this company, Cineric, which specializes in restoring classic films. So he's worked for a long time with the American studios and archives and European studios, but the industry had not really existed so much in Japan. So I started to essentially produce restorations of Japanese classic films using resources from outside of Japan, like from Martin Scorsese's foundation or the Japan Foundation, from Mizuguchi Films, Ozu Films. And that's how I really started in the film industry. And I met some young filmmakers. I didn't study film in university like Emma did, but I met some young filmmakers who were active internationally between Japan and the US especially. And I started producing their independent film projects, both narrative and documentary. And that's what I've been doing along with the restoration for now the last 12 years or so.
Wow.
Along the way, he can speak Japanese.
Yes. And, so I studied, but then, it's of course in private life or, in a work setting, that's the best way to really learn it, I think.
Great. Well, we have Yuriko Romer with us. Hi, Yuriko.
Emma, hi. I think we've met on several webinars. I think it was on Japan Ball, maybe through David James. But yeah, I love your film. It's wonderful. And yeah, one of these days we have to meet in person and maybe we can show all our films together. But Catherine, I have to say, there's actually two films going on. So Diamond Diplomacy, which is the feature film about US-Japan relations through baseball. And, you know, you should know, Emma, I think you probably do know that this is 150th year of arrival of baseball in Japan.
Mm.
So there's a lot of stuff going on. And actually, we're putting on a big event down in Los Angeles during the All-Star Week.
Nice.
At Janum. And then I just started editing the film that is going to be a short film about talking about the World War II Japanese American incarceration, but all through the stories of baseball. So, so that one actually will probably come out first. But anyways, it's lovely to meet you. And one of these days I'll meet both of you in person. And yeah, I'd love to hear more about, you know, are you guys living in Japan?
Yeah, we're pretty much based here for the time being. Maybe once it's easier, safer to move around again, we'll probably become a bit more mobile, but we've been based here for the past couple of years.
We just moved 2 days ago to Yanaka, right by Ueno Park.
Okay.
After having lived more kind of in the south and the west of Tokyo. So it's a brand new life for us here, you know, with a baby on the way and, you know, new film.
Oh, good luck with that.
So, yeah.
How exciting. So I think you said, but when is the baby due?
Early June.
I handed in my master's thesis film and then was pregnant a couple months later. And I missed a whole bunch of film festivals because I couldn't travel. But then I took my son as a baby to a bunch of film festivals. So he used to
we plan to do that.
Yeah, well, they like the green exit signs. They just but you should do that like early before they start crying and stuff, you know, because then after that you can't really. But yeah. So I'm actually going to be there in October for the US-Japan Council conference, or should be. And so maybe we can meet then.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, they proposed we show Koshien at the conference.
Yeah, I talked to Josh Mori and he was saying that he had, or I don't know if he actually met you, but somebody had met you and they mentioned it too. There's a whole group of people within US-Japan Council that are baseball people. So actually, we're all putting on the Janum thing during the All-Star Week. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So too bad you're not going to be in these states, but.
Great. Thanks, Yuriko. And the short is called Baseball Behind Barbed Wire. Is that right?
That's what it's called right at the moment.
Oh, okay. That's the working
we'll
title.
see what happens in the end, but
okay.
But that's pretty much what it is. So.
There's a children's book called Baseball Saved Us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think there's actually a book called Baseball Behind Barbed Wire also, but we'll see if it sticks. That's the working title for now.
Okay. Sadako has a great suggestion. Ichiro will be eligible and most likely elected into the MLB Hall of Fame in 2025. Please make your Ichiro film and tie it to him being in the first Japanese in the Hall of Fame.
This is exactly our plan.
Exactly our dream.
And no matter what, I will be there the day he's inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Actually, that's Soji's chat.
Great.
We should get a petition going and send it to Ichiro.
Yeah.
Nominate you.
All right. And we're all going to meet in Cooperstown in 2025, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
so you guys are having a tiger baby.
Yes.
You're gonna name him Takeshi if it's a boy?
Takeshi, maybe not, but it is a boy, so he's gonna be a tiger boy.
Not Takeshi.
No, we have too many Takeshis in our lives already, so I think we need something more unique.
Ichiro.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely a candidate, maybe for a middle name.
Okay, well, I feel like we've kept you for a long time, so I'm going to let you go, but thank you again for joining us. And thank you to everyone in our audience for staying with us and for your fantastic comments. give a wave or a clap as you leave, and we will see everybody at our next movie night, second Friday of the month. And meanwhile, Emma and Eric and I will work on when we can get them back as our guests sometime to show one of their films.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a